With the new mid-season patch now out for Overwatch 2, it's important to know who to play and who is an automatic loss if you pick them. Today we're going to be breaking down tanks, and we're going to be listing them from best to worst because you do want to give your team the best opportunity to win. And I did a lot of research looking at what's being played in competitive in the higher ranks, mid ranks, lower ranks, as well as what's being played in the Overwatch League. And this video is definitely going to be tailored for those not at the very top because you probably don't even watch this video. So we're actually going to do it for everyone who's getting into competitive and is climbing the ranks from the low and the mid ranks and eventually achieving the top ranks. So this is a list for those who play competitively, play to win, but also play to have fun. And you probably don't queue with the full team, so it's also important to take note that, you're not going to have that perfect combination or a teammate that knows exactly what you're going to do, especially as a tank. You rely on them so much. So that is going to be playing a big factor in today's list. Again, this list is for the people, you. Now, without further ado, if you like this type of content, I will be making a list for DPS and support, so make sure to subscribe and like the video. And without further ado, let's get right into the list. First up in the automatic loss tier, we have none other than Doomfist. I'm sure this isn't a surprise to anybody. He doesn't really do enough DPS. When he charges up, all the hits he takes and all the mitigation he procs really doesn't result into that many kills. And although he does mitigate damage for himself, he doesn't really do anything that benefits the team. And if you want a DPS that's more disrupting, more about doing damage and going after the back line while surviving, well, basically anybody else on this list is going to be much better. Doomfist just kind of fails at everything right now. Maybe he should be a support. How about that? That's how bad he is. Sticking with the same tier, we do have another person in the automatic loss tier. But he did get a slight upgrade and he could move up this list due to this mid-season patch. And it's nothing that affected him per se, it's what affected the DPS around him that would be going after him, specifically Sombra. Now everybody knows Sombra was second only to Sojourn in the must-pick category in like the super high DPS category. But unlike Sojourn, who really could only one-shot other DPS and supports, Sombra could actually melt tanks with her hack ability. But now with the hack ability being reduced, Hamtaro is no longer prevented from doing what he does best. Because of this, I do put him above Doomfist, because unlike Doomfist, who is kind of squishy, Hamtaro could actually last for a long time by himself. He could be really annoying, but at the same time, the other team could completely ignore him, focus on the objective, kill everybody else, and Hamtaro's basically pointless at that point. So although he is significantly better than Doomfist in my opinion, he's still an auto loss if you pick him on your team. Hey man, don't play these shitty tanks. Next up, we're gonna move up a tier. It's not so much that it's an auto loss, it's more that you have like a beefy DPS, which doesn't do as much as DPS. And of course, we're talking about Junker Queen. With her low HP as a tank and low mobility, meaning she doesn't have any dashes or anything to get to one place or another, she isn't that great. Now, before the game actually launched, Junker Queen's ability, the buff that she gives to the entire team, the speed boost and the health, now that was kind of crazy, and she was one of the best tanks. But Blizzard nerfed that ability to the ground. And now Junker Queen doesn't really do much for her team. She doesn't really mitigate or protect her teammates, and she also can't deal out a lot of DPS or really disrupt like some other characters on this list. So she's just kind of like a tanky DPS. Could kind of be annoying, could output more consistent damage than Hamtaro and Doomfist, and that's why she is a tier above. But overall, if you're picking her and expecting to win against a competent team, there is going to be a huge tank diff, and it's not even the skill. It's literally just the hero you're picking. Stop being so average. Because of that, we're going to move on to the next tier, which I call the solid tier. This is a tier where you're okay queuing up by yourself because you are going to have enough damage mitigation and still be able to put a lot of pressure on the enemy team. Now, this is where it varies, and solid tier isn't the final tier we're talking about, but these characters are pretty good on every map, and you could actually use them in multiple situations with multiple team comps. Up first, let's talk about the hot topic Zarya. She's no longer super OP because of her nerf. Her barrier time got decreased from 2.5 seconds to 2 seconds, and her cooldowns got increased from 10 seconds to 11 seconds. So her bubble won't be up for as long and as often, which means she can't mitigate as much damage throughout the game. She was never really able to mitigate a lot of damage on other teammates. Like, you would never really use it that way, because if you're using your bubble on your teammates, then, the enemy team would just focus down on Zarya and she'd lose what made her OP, right? Point is, she's not going to be able to mitigate damage for as long, meaning she's not going to be able to build up her laser as often and for as much throughout the entire game. And this means that her damage output, what made her so competitive, what made her so OP to be honest, is that she could just mitigate and deal crazy amounts of damage. That's not going to be happening as often, but I think she's definitely still solid. And honestly, maybe her cooldowns need to increase to 12, because although on paper this seems pretty good, I don't trust that this is going to solve the problem completely. And maybe Zarya still deserves to be on the tier above this one. Like I said, I think Zarya is still very solid. So if you learn how to play Zarya during her OP phase, keep going at it. I think you're going to do great with your team. Next, let's talk about Orisa. Now, what I really love about Orisa is that she's like a good tank pressure. So she's good to counter a lot of tanks and just bully all the other tanks on the enemy team. Basically, you're controlling the pace of the match, especially with her spear, which could stun and interrupt. I mean, Orisa's really great. She has solid damage output as well. Not really high burst damage, but it's damage that you could put out consistently. So if Fury's putting out consistent damage on a tank per se, and then your DPS comes in and bursts at one certain point, you're just gonna melt that tank right away. But she does have low mobility. She also really can't mitigate damage for a lot of her teammates. Plus, Orisa's ultimate is not that great. You can catch some people by surprise sometimes, but that's why she's in the solid tier. The next tank in the solid tier is D.Va. I think she's still a really solid and really good dive tank. They did nerf her DPS a little bit with her rockets being spread out a little bit more, meaning, you know, they're not going to be as accurate and you're not going to hit all your rockets in the same target as often, but she still has great mobility, which is a huge plus in Overwatch 2. She does have her defense matrix to block damage, so she could actually mitigate damage for herself and her team. Her ultimate is still crazy. You could like really turn the tide of games that way. And the fact that she has the diving ability, right? Be able to push people off the map and yes, rush like a pesky Widowmaker or something like that. I mean, D.Va's really good, but the other tanks above on this list do something a little bit better than D.Va. Not only do they have some good mobility, they could also attack while defend. Because the problem with D.Va is that she could be diving, and if you don't have a Kiriko that teleports with her, and even if Kiriko teleports with her, they both might be in a bad situation because D.Va is kind of squishy. She could quickly get melted. She also can't mitigate damage for her team while putting on pressure and DPS. Yup, you solid. Go get some wins. Next, we move up to the tier of situational badass. And I say badass because it's only one person. Now, Reinhardt isn't really made for Overwatch 2, where there's only one tank, where there's big open maps with a lot of flanks and a lot of different lanes to kind of go through. You can't just push through the one center lane, put down your shield, and everybody is behind you anymore. You know, you're going to be flanked from multiple different directions. And not only yourself, your teammates are also getting flanked. That means you're not going to be able to protect them from all sides. So as a defender with this barrier, he still can't use it as effectively as other people on the game. Plus, he could only defend or attack. He can't do both at the same time. So you could quickly put down your shield, throw a ranged attack, put it back up. But in those little moments, you know, your teammates could be getting hit, which isn't a weakness that other people on this list have. But again, not every map is open with a lot of flanks. There are a lot of chokeholds on certain maps. And that's where I think Reinhardt really shines. Because of course, if anybody comes and tries to disrupt your backline, your supports are right behind you, turn around with Reinhardt and demolish everybody. So Reinhardt definitely still has his place, and definitely if you're a Reinhardt main, don't worry, keep using him. He's great even at the upper tiers. This is your main, you good. But there are definitely advantages that a lot of the heroes on this list have over Reinhardt. Oh, and I forgot to mention, with Reinhardt, you're super dependent on your team. So if you get queued up with some bad people, if you're not queuing up with the support that you know and play with, man, it could be really bad. You know, if you're gonna attack Moira on your team and is not healing you, whew, which is unlike the tank in the very best tier. Dominate the team on specific maps. Let's talk about Winston, the true great dive tank in this game. Now, Winston, I think, is great because he does have solid damage output, just like D.Va. He has good mobility, just like D.Va. He could damage mitigate for his team, just like D.Va, but at the same time, put damage while that mitigation is happening. Be able to put his bubble shield where his supports are, where his backlines are, and then rush forward. Probably not a great idea, but he could do that, right? And he could also prevent enemy team from getting support from their supports with that bubble shield. So Winston just kind of does everything that the other tanks do, but is able to do them all at once. And I think that's what makes Winston a top tier tank in this meta. Next, let's talk about a great disrupting and offensive tank. If you want to do something fun, you don't really want to play at the line and the lane, cool. Don't play Junker. Don't play Doomfist. Don't play Hamtaro. Why not play Roadhog? Somebody who is actually great when you're solo queuing, especially in lower ranks when you really can't depend on support. And even in mid and higher ranks, right? Again, and then pesky attack Moria so don't heal you. Roadhog is great because he could actually heal himself. He's super tanky, has a lot of health. You could flank with him, and you could also play the front line and just be super annoying. Ignore the enemy tank and go for their back line in the middle lane. Roadhog could do all of that. Plus, his hook is a great interrupt and disrupt, and you can get a lot of pesky picks if you get really good with that ability. And don't sleep on Roadhog's ultimate. That thing outputs damage like crazy, and in some cheeky spots, he can definitely push people off the map. I think Roadhog gives you a lot of flexibility that you don't get with all the other attack tanks. And to be honest, if you like playing Orisa and like disrupting as well, I would still say go for Roadhog. And lastly, in the top tier, I want to talk about Sigma, somebody with great range, good damage, and good mitigation. And he's also very flexible. Whereas we said Reinhardt's kind of weakness with his barrier is that he could only really protect one side in the front line, and he kind of has to be there too, right? And also can't output damage at the same time. Sigma could actually move his shield around and protect from a lot of different angles. In a lot of maps now, there's high ground, right? When you're pushing that objective and that payload. But with the shield, you're actually able to block shots from up top. And although he doesn't have as much flexibility like with a dash or something, the fact that you could throw your shield away from yourself means you could protect allies even when you can't get to them right away. Plus, his ultimate is definitely a game changer. If you ever pull that out and the enemy team is controlling the objective and you got a DPS on point with you, you're gonna melt everybody really quick. So I think Sigma is actually the best tank to play as a standard tank, where you're gonna be standing in the middle lane with your team. With Sigma, you really don't want to be flanking, so that's the only thing that's not as good about Sigma as you can do with Winston or Roadhog, right? But that's why I think these are the top 3 tanks for each of those playstyles. Roadhog is like a DPS tank, disruptor, interrupter, flanker. Winston is a great diver, and Sigma, I think, is the best barrier tank to play in lane. And if you pick one of those 3 tanks, I think you give your team the best chances of winning. Go and crush everybody else. Chicken chow mein chain, let it all hang, man. But like I said, solid tier. D.Va, Orisa, Zarya, still got a good chance of winning. If you like to play those characters, play them. Same with Reinhardt. You'll just want to switch off a Reinhardt for specific maps. And stay awake from Junker Queen, Hamtaro, and Doomfist. Definitely auto losses if you pick them. Hopefully they get addressed in Season 2, but that is yet to be seen. So what do you guys think of the list? And would you guys order any of these differently? Let me know down in the comments. And again, like the video, subscribe, because we got a DPS list and a support list coming out for you really soon. Thanks again for watching.